Hey everyone, welcome back to Software Without Borders, where we explore the ever-evolving world of software and its impact on business and industries worldwide. I'm your co-host, Andy Hilliard, CEO of Accelerants, and by the way, I'm based in Sonoma, California. And with me today is my co-host, Ryan Schauer, Partner Success Manager at Accelerants.
Thanks, Andy. Today's guest is someone who's been on the cutting edge of software and tech leadership. So we're excited to have Howie Altman on the show today. Howie's experienced executive with deep understanding in the agile frameworks. He's got a ton of hands-on experience in agile transformations with a background in optimizing remote teams. But it seems lately, Howie, you've been diving headfirst in the world of AI, bringing your leadership and process know-how to one of the most exciting fields in the tech space right now.
Yeah, Howie, we're super excited to hear your insights on navigating the challenges of modern software development. Welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me very much. Like I said, Howie Altman. I'm coming from New York City today, and I have a deep passion for software, have since I was a kid. And even before AI was cool recently, I've really been enthusiastic about it. And it's been my deepest focus for the last 10 years or so.
Very, very cool. We're looking to dive in to explore your evolution and just explore some of your thought leadership. So I think that probably the best place to start is, you've been on a pretty wild ride. Like most leaders, you start at the bottom as a software engineer, and then moving up the scale, eventually to be a CTO and even co-founding some companies. Can you just describe some big moments or decisions that ultimately pushed you and transitioned you from a tech guy to be a leader?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned a second ago, since I was as little as I can remember, I've always loved technology and software. And, if anyone looks up my age, I'm about to turn 46. So dating myself, when I was first falling in love with software, it was very nascent. I was very fortunate that the school I was at had some of the Apple IIGs or 2Es or whatever they were called, cassette tapes for hard drives, and Logo as a programming language, as well as BASIC, of course. And the thing that drew me to it then, although I didn't realize I didn't know how to put it into words, it was really having an open playground and being able to create almost anything that you can imagine. And as I got older and I went through school and went to for my degree in computer science, you realize that there aren't many other areas where that's true. At least across engineering, chemical engineering, material science, mechanical, there are physical constraints. And yes, there of course are physical constraints in software, and hardware, and so on. But for all intents and purposes, you're really unbounded. And that ability to take a concept and turn it into something that's real very quickly, and without those other kinds of constraints, was always really exciting to me. And so I got into software engineering as I knew I would when I was a kid, and I was one of the few people I knew that actually had a vision of what I wanted to do when I grow up, and it kind of stayed that way. But then when I got into industry, I was a software engineer for a few years. I did some internships when I was in college, but after doing it for a few years as a professional, at least for myself, I realized that it wasn't the right fit. I didn't lose my passion over software technology by any means, but I wasn't able to have the kind of impact that I wanted just being an individual contributor at a big company. And at that time, I was at Motorola before, when it was big. Sitting in a cube all day and coding a very small piece of a very big project was not getting me excited anymore. And so that was kind of the initial pivot into more of the management leadership side of things, where I realized that I wanted to be able to, drive bigger outcomes and have more purview over the solution and the implementation, all things that got my juices going.
So, I have to ask this question because I think most leaders and most people, as they progress through their professional lives, think about, am I in a position, or am I evolving to a position that that provides me continually more energy and more happiness? Am I really cut out for leadership? Did I go into this to become a leader, or did I go into it because I loved engineering? And so I have a friend, Gary Fry, who wrote this book, Silence the Imposter. And big topic nowadays is imposter syndrome. Right. So it doesn't sound like you dealt with it, but I'd like to hear from you exactly. Yeah. Did you rise to a level of starting to question, is this the right direction, or have I've surpassed my area of happiness?
Yeah, it's a great question. I want to clarify one thing before I answer that. Like when I say just using the word just, being an individual contributor, I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. Like I think that, being an individual contributor, if that is what aligns to your values and what gives you satisfaction and happiness, that's freaking amazing. Like there are some of the best software engineers and people that have come up with the most world-changing science have been individual contributors. So I'm not saying it in a demeaning way. I'm saying it in a way that is exactly aligned with your question of what is it in my value system? What is it that gives me that drive to do something different than that? And if you're at a bigger company, especially, and after that initial stint at Motorola, I've always been at mid-size or smaller companies or startups. So I don't have a ton of experience as an employee of a big company, but my big company experience taught me very clearly that there are two very noble and amazing paths. One is as an uber individual contributor, and one is either a leader or a manager. And neither is better than the other. It's like eye color. It just is dependent upon the person and how they think and how they operate. And so I want to just give that context because this is just a very personal thing. And I don't want to sound like I think leaders are great and individual contributors are not, because nothing like that at all. Like some of my, anyway, I don't need to repeat what I said a minute ago, but I'm just emphatic about it, right? And for me, one of the things I suffer from is overconfidence. So I will say that it's a little bit interesting, right? In that, in some ways, it's been one of my biggest strengths, especially as an entrepreneur, to have a ton of confidence about a concept, an idea that I really believe in. And it doesn't mean that I develop it in a vacuum and don't triangulate it with experts. Of course I do. But then there's a level of that where I feel like I can push through any barrier and get to the outcomes that I'm envisioning. And most of the time, it works really, really well. But when it doesn't, it fails really, really badly. And so I think that's also part of this answer, which is I don't think I've gotten past any point of beyond capability. But I think as you have greater and greater impact, whether that's as an exceptional individual contributor or an exceptional leader, you have to be very thoughtful.
Sure.
And you have to be very cognizant that there's a lot you don't know almost nothing.
Sure, absolutely.
You don't know way more than you know.
Yeah, I think confidence is a very powerful tool, and it's needed by leaders and frankly anyone to give them the energy and the desire to seek a solution. But that doesn't mean you don't have self-doubt. It doesn't mean you don't fail. And you have to realize, and you could classify that as imposter syndrome, as I'm covering up my deficiencies with the fake confidence. But the reality is you need confidence to move you ahead. But at the same time, you have to deal with the fact that we're all human and fallible, and we make mistakes, and it's okay.
Absolutely. Right? So if it's fake confidence, I think that's going to probably get you into trouble. And you need to probably work on what is it that is about you that is causing you to lack that confidence.
Yeah. Now, it could get you into trouble, or it could get you elected president, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Well, it could, right? And then you get people that are promoted beyond their level of capability. And that's a big problem throughout the world, and that happens all the time. So absolutely. But I think, maybe to turn this into what would I say, having now, had 25 years of experience on this path, and seeing how this big strength that I think is tied in some ways of me never experiencing this imposter syndrome, also being a pretty substantial weakness if I don't guardrail it, if I'm not aware of it. And if I don't surround myself with people that are able to see the risks, or able to see the pessimistic side of things, is do that. figure out, like, be self-aware as much as it hurts initially because of your ego, and really recognize and use other people as needed, because it's hard to do it to yourself. You need mirrors. And when you understand your strengths and weaknesses, you can design around those weaknesses, and you can surround yourself with teams that complement you, and you can take ideas and you can execute things in a way that is so much bigger and better than yourself, because I'm leveraging, I don't know, take any example, right, where I've had a big team, like being able to execute something that is really grand, that requires 100 excellent engineers. I wouldn't be able to even be engaged in that at a high level if I wasn't self-aware and I wasn't able to create that ecosystem in which they can all thrive.
Yeah.
And I can just steer things when needed.
Yeah.
But that's because I have those great people to help me.
Yeah.
And it's very symbiotic to get to that common goal and to succeed at that mission.
Yeah. Well, you said 46, right? 46?
Yeah, about to be 46 in January.
So you're old enough to have a lot of different experiences in different industries, from fintech, recruiting platforms, building industries. And you're also young enough to morph your ideology and your thinking around new technologies and new business models and things like that. So has that really helped you evolve, mature, and be a better leader?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think what's interesting to me, and I'll use an anecdote, right? Like, I can't remember the name of the book, so I won't mess it up. But there's a really great book. I wish I could think of the name. And it essentially compiles studies of when people would ask me questions like this before, I would usually preface it with, my path was a little weird, but. And when you actually do research on thousands of people who are like that, they all say that same thing. But if you don't know each other, you don't know that there's a whole community of people saying that same thing. And so I don't actually think my path is unusual anymore. I think it's right for me. And part of that was always gravitating to problems that needed solutions that were really compelling to me. And what does that mean? That means it's complex. It is not something that everybody can solve. It is something that has a reasonable risk of failure. And I wasn't like itemizing these things in my mind as a checklist. Those are just the types of problems that I always found exciting. And then when I got to see those, because they happen to appear in different industries at different times. They happen to appear in different organizations or different size companies at different times. And I was very agnostic to all of that through that journey. And so what I learned through that, which is what this book talks about, and I wish I could remember it, but basically, some of the greatest advances in humankind come from when an expert in domain X can share that expertise with an expert in domain Y when the person in domain Y is stuck. And the same is true across industries in the tech world, right? Where the basic principles and the fundamentals of how you, let's say, I know you guys have built an extremely successful business over the decades on helping organizations build and manage successfully globally distributed teams. Now, that doesn't, I think you would agree that it doesn't matter if you're in finance or if you're in, retail or if you're in hospitality, it doesn't matter. But I think the traditional career path kind of is the antithesis of that. And you're not able to abstract those principles and those concepts in a way that is globally applicable if you don't see it enough times in enough different situations where you actually believe it. You can read it, but until you see, look, everyone thinks they're different, and they are a little bit, but mostly they're not. And the way that you succeed and the way that you apply problem solving and the way you apply principles and modules, even if it comes to hands-on software development, it's all the same. And it has to be adapted for the domain and the organization and the people involved. And it has to marry with a culture that's consistent with that and with those individuals. But I think that got me to see it firsthand and really have that breakthrough of I can conceptualize things across, it doesn't matter, right? And then that leads to the other part of the answer, I think, which is how does that then enable me and fuel me in a sense of what I can attack next? And so some of the things that I'm involved in now, we can get into the details or we don't have to, but essentially, like I'm working now on probably some of the most complex problems I've ever dealt with, but they don't feel that way in some aspects because I know, and the people that I'm working with know, that the fundamental pieces that are required for those are the same things we've been doing and have been successful at for a long time. We just can't be stuck in the thinking that like this is an entirely novel thing. It's novel in certain ways that are very difficult. But those are the pieces we should be focused on. If you're trying to solve the whole thing, every time you go into a new situation, you're starting from scratch, and we don't want to do that.
Well, look, I'm, we don't want to insult any young leaders here, but experience does allow you to look at things that appear novel, but are not quite as novel as they appear to be, right?
And to extract from that novelty is not a word, novelness. I don't know what the word is, but like, to extract what are the real things? What are the real things that are unsolved? What are the real things that require that immense like brain power and problem solving and creativity? And there are pieces of that mosaic that's true for. But you can cut through all the rest. And, for the young leaders, I think the first step in anything, in any kind of process like this, is intellectualizing it. So, like, even if you don't believe it yet or haven't seen it yet, if you can start to believe it intellectually, you at least have that first step. And then over time, I wish it was something you can get from intellectually understanding it to internalizing and operating that way without having to go through it. But unfortunately, that's not how it works.
Sure.
Yeah. With that, I'd love to just expand and get into the weeds a little bit on that, on the different projects and the different companies that you're working in.
Sure.
Nothing frightens me more than a blank sheet of paper. So coming in and building a product from scratch, what are some of the factors? What is the process that you go through to, is it you're looking at a problem to solve first, or are you looking at a piece of technology? What's sort of that thought process to get you started?
It's interesting. I've even had a recent evolution in my thinking along those lines. So let me try to keep it somewhat brief, but answer it like thoroughly, which is for the last 7 years, I've been a serial tech entrepreneur. And so 3 years prior to that, I was like in a CTO like, or DPMs, a CPM, depending on the stage of the company, it's all the same, CTO, head tech person. And those were where, before that, I was at Bridgewater Associates, the hedge fund, for almost 8 years as a tech manager in many different senior roles. And going from an environment where it wasn't all a blank sheet of paper in the first part of my career to where it was essentially a blank sheet of paper, but my first forays into that were assisted in the sense that they were startups, but they already had some traction. So it wasn't completely a blank sheet of paper, but it gave me that ability to be very creative, have a lot of influence and control over how it was going to go. And then being on the executive teams of those companies also let me have influence in the overall business, not just the tech pieces. But then going from that to the serial entrepreneur thing for the last 7 years, it's completely blank. And so when we get to that completely blank thing, when I first got into that, I was lucky in the sense that I like to joke that in some ways, relative to many entrepreneurs, I did my career backwards, where I didn't do the entrepreneur thing like out of college or in college, and then go from there. I sort of decided, like early on, I knew I wanted to do something on my own. I didn't know what. Then I got very comfortable being like a number two. It was a good balance. It was, my sweet spot and so on. And then I was like, after I got into the startup thing for a bit, I was like, I want to do this. Like, I don't know exactly what, but I want to do this. And so, the first instances of truly trying to create and deploy something novel into the world, we're looking at technologies and how we can apply those technologies. And more recently, I've pivoted a bit to first identifying a very clear market need, agnostic of what technology was required to solve it. And there are pros and cons to both paths, in my opinion. The technology-centric approach, for me, was harder because it's like a really great new technology, and the applicability could be endless. And you have to start prioritizing where you want to attack, like what markets you want to try to get into. Do you do that where you're just licensing your technology to someone who's already doing something like that? Do you build bespoke products for each vertical and sell those because of those market needs? And it was a lot more difficult to navigate because it's so ambiguous and open-ended. And if you're not focused really crisply on an obvious demand signal, it's tough to navigate, because what I found is you have to find just the right people who really get it. And that's a small percentage of the people that you talk to. And so the conversion rate on conversations to actual proof of concept and contracts is so much smaller than if you're going after one specific, clear demand signal and just talking to everybody that needs that thing. So at the same time, I wouldn't have wanted to not do the technology-centric approach, because I think specifically that's Perceiver I'm talking about, which is a novel form of AI that's patent pending that we created. It's based on a very different paradigm from neural networks and deep learning, which large language models are based on. It's called evolutionary computation or genetic programming, which is more like evolution than a brain, and you actually evolve code. So the engine, over millions or billions of generations of digital evolution, take building blocks of code and generate algorithms that solve problems. That is pretty cool and has really, tremendous power. But it was much harder to create something that was commercially viable from that than some of the new things that I'm approaching, which is solving a very specific market need, regardless of what technology is involved. And for example, one thing that I'm working on now, which is in early stages, is AI companions for slowing cognitive decline and being useful to patients in hospital settings. That is something that a few years ago I would have never done. There's another one. Anyway, it doesn't even matter. Those are just two examples, right? And they're very, very different examples. One is a foundational technology, and one is solving a very clear need. And the way you navigate that is just radically different. And I think the one where you have a very clear need that you approach is much, much easier and gets you to be more successful more quickly. But maybe it doesn't leave behind as powerful a new product for the world. And I still don't know what the end game of Perceiver is going to be. We are currently launching a hedge fund that is based on it, because that is the best way to monetize it. But one day, even the concept of open sourcing it eventually to just give it to the world is pretty compelling, because it's a pretty amazing piece of technology.
And with staying on the topic with Perceiver, how do you see this just changing the market and the application, especially with the probably exponential growth of AI in the next few years, if not 1 or 2 years?
Yep. Yeah, I think it's so the beautiful thing about Perceiver or any solution that may come around using this approach is you get two things that you can't get with neural networks and deep learning, not in a good way anyway. There are hacks, there are things that have been put out there to, let's say, solving explainability in models. Right? Explainability in models is a big problem. It's a big part of why you're not seeing a lot of AI in clinical settings. It's why it took so long for AI to be adopted by financial services. Right? There's impediments that are there still. A lot of tools out there that try to reverse engineer the models. We factor them, give you heuristics on, what variables went into it from the training data set, all this stuff, but it's still not real explainability. And Perceiver, anything that evolves code, it's just code. It's completely explainable. It's completely transparent. There's no question about what the thought process is. I mean, we were joking before we started this podcast, like, well, the recent news that the new GPT model is apparently trying to deceive researchers when confronted about its behavior of copying itself to not allow itself to be deleted or circumventing its security controls. And then you look at it and say, well, why is it doing that? How is it doing that? No clue. It's so big and complicated that you can't even look into it, right? And so that's a big problem. The other problem is that as advanced as LLMs are getting, they're still based upon neural networks, and the math of that technology makes it difficult for those types of models to understand certain relationships within data sets that are not, now it's getting able to see more and more complex patterns. And it's starting to fold in some basic reasoning. But the math still prohibits it from seeing more complex relationships in that data. And when you look at spaces like investment management or healthcare or a whole host of other ones, the data sets that you use for training or that you use to base your solutions on generally are still more complicated than what those models can perceive. No pun intended, that's why we call it a perceiver. Where, in investment management, like trading, you're really interested in covariances, for example, like how do two variables relate to one another, but it's not in a straightforward manner. A typical neural network is not going to be able to make use of that, but a technology using evolutionary computation can. And so as we see the advent of quantum, just imagine the power of translating something like perceiver into the quantum domain. Now you have the ability to evolve models based on really what evolution does, right? It takes an enormous search space and it very efficiently narrowed it down to the best answers. That's what happens with biological evolution. It just takes a really long time, by our standards anyway. And you can shrink that because you can do 1 million generations in a minute on a GPU. Imagine what you can do on quantum and the complexity of those models. So now you start to get into really, really compelling things that also raise a lot of ethical and security questions.
Howie, I have an important question. And that is, do you speak to your grandmother with that mouth?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes when you get into the weeds, it's like, very, very cool and stuff like that. I wanted to ask one quick question. So Perceiver AI is your own venture.
Yes.
But you're also a fractional CTO.
Yes.
One question is, why are you a fractional CTO and why are you how do you bifurcate the two? And also in your fractional CTO work, do you kind of specialize in ML AI driven initiatives, or is it just, pretty much anything that comes in the door?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the honest answer, when the first business that I started is a consultancy. So we've got a 160 person product engineering firm based in the Dominican Republic. We work mainly with growth startups in New York City, as well as implementing and managing innovation teams at larger Fortune 1000 companies, mainly their branches in the Caribbean. And getting traction to where you get reasonable cash flow takes time. And so the fractional CTO work started as a way to generate income while building that initial company. And it is true that I've gravitated in recent years to initiatives, products, companies that specialize in AI ML, because that's where my passion lies these days. But I've done all sorts of things across different industries, with AI, without AI. And when I really got into the fractional CTO space, I also started advising startups. I'm a mentor with ERA, which is the largest startup accelerator on the East Coast in New York City. Been doing that for about 5 years. And I just love everything about startups. I love the ecosystem. I love working with anything from idea stage to we want to go raise our Series B in a year. Like we have to make sure we get there and our technology scaled with it. So
I mean, it creates ideas for you. It generates additional income. A lot of entrepreneurs, they want to focus 100% on what they're doing. And in order to do so, they need to go out and get outside capital, which of course means giving away control and equity of your company. And other entrepreneurs, actually like me, and it sounds like you want to augment your cash flow through outside work while you work on your own passion project, which means that you can control more of your own destiny, right?
Absolutely. Like we've taken, for all of our ventures, we've taken very little outside capital over the years.
Yeah.
And that was by design.
You're diversifying your risk and your cash flow. Yeah.
No, very admittedly, just so I'm not like, I don't want to be like a hypocrite. Like with the newer things, I'm actively exploring more of a venture path to accelerate it. So I don't think one is right or wrong. Again, it's all a question of like, what do you want? What's your appetite? Who do you want to report to? Right? Do you want to report to investors or do you want to report to your users? And so fractional CTO work for me has been just a ton of fun. And I've gotten to be involved in things that I wouldn't have gotten to be involved in otherwise. But also it's supplemented cash flow very nicely at times where the cash flow from the other businesses was light or not existent because of the nature of that game.
Yeah, and you're learning how to impart value and your own knowledge to a client, while also gathering a lot of new knowledge that is applicable to your own ventures.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all very symbiotic. And, it's a big startup world in one sense. It's also a very small one. You run into the same people over and over again. And people that I've helped with their things have helped me with their things. I'm about to be working for someone in a fractional capacity that is an investor and perceiver, and we've been friends for years. So like the most important, so I guess two really important things, I guess maybe this is turning these stories into like a little bit of advice, like don't go it alone. I'm very fortunate. I have two amazing co-founders in everything I've done, almost everything I've done. And a third one on the hedge fund side who's also amazing. On the new things, I'm also not a sole founder. And I know everyone, I think it's kind of common knowledge you want to at least have one co-founder, but you know what? It's more than that. Like we have strengths and weaknesses that complement each other. We are brothers in arms, and we go through the highs and lows together. But it's a bigger inner circle than just the co-founders too. Like every so often you find someone really fantastic, and you may not even have a way to work together right away, but keep them close. Like my girlfriend jokes with me, like, I don't really have a separation between friends and partners. I don't. And that's also by design in a way. Like when I find great humans that I want to spend my life with, I want to do everything with them. I want to have beers with them. I want to chat with them about my problems, but I also want to start businesses with them. And when it's reciprocal, that's beautiful. And I am able to do all of these things at once because of that.
I'll augment that as a lesson, I think, to the audience if they want to take it as such. And that is to layer your levels of relationships, both from a personal, professional, direct accountability, coaches, cohorts, peers, and think about it in different layers, because ultimately, it's really difficult to go through this journey being on an island by yourself. But at the same time, I think it's not as easy if you have just one type of supporter or peer on a certain level. I think if you think about layering them from sort of high level advisors, thought leaders, to lower level practitioners, or even co-founders, where you're actually directly accountable and responsible for follow through. That is very tactical, and then start thinking about what gaps do you have in your interaction with different people, with different perspectives, different commitments to you, both personally and professionally. And I think you really get a good blend of support, and you don't feel like you're alone.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I won't repeat anything you said. You said it beautifully. I think it's more like the only thing I would add on is, and this was probably just a blind spot of mine early in my career. And another thing pointed at maybe younger leaders or younger entrepreneurs is, and maybe everyone just knows this except for me, fine too. But I used to believe that, I used to hate networking. I used to hate going to events. I used to be like, why am I wasting my time with this stuff? I just want to focus on the work. And that's so wrong and so backwards for so many reasons. Especially when you get to the point where you are, not get to the point, whether it's early in your career or later. For me, it was getting to the point, but for someone else, it might be the first thing they do. When you're in this broader community of tech and business leaders, we're all trying to do, by and large, like they're good people trying to do good things. You have exceptions, but for the most part, they're just people trying to do cool stuff. And, it just becomes this interconnected web of goodness. Like I can call someone up that I haven't spoken to in 2 years or even 10 years in some cases and be like, I'm working on this thing. I saw your profile. I think you might be interested. Can we talk? And everyone says yes. And that's how and the reason why that is because you have those good relationships. And it's the support for being when you're on an island, like you said, but more so for me in the original questions context is there is no way in hell I'd be able to be doing the entrepreneurship I'm doing and doing the fractional CTO work that I've done, and have any bandwidth for anything else, thinking about new ideas or just having personal time, if I didn't have a really, really amazing inner circle of people that I could count on, that could also count on me, and that we share the values and the missions. Because I know when someone else has something, they have it. And they know when I have it, I have it. And so I'm not spending 100 hours a week on each venture. It just wouldn't be feasible. If I had to do that, I would be doing one thing. I would be spending all my, and you know what? For some people, they do that. They spend 80 hours, 100 hours a week on their startups, and they build unicorns. But also the majority of people that do that, it doesn't work out. And so I heard this thing recently that I've kind of adopted, half jokingly, half serious. It's a little bit of a portfolio approach to a career. Like, I love working on lots of different things. It doesn't matter if it's within one company or across multiple companies. So find what you love, find the configuration that works for you, build a network of amazing people around yourself, and you have a lot of optionality.
That's very true. I definitely agree with that. I want to pivot again back to the world of AI because it's just so exciting. And there's just so many things going on there.
My grandmother would be proud. I will keep talking about it.
Definitely. I mean, do you just wake up in the middle of the night, just in this cold sweat, frightened that you've just broken all of humanity of everything you're dealing with in the AI space, right? The robots are coming. What do you guys talk about from an ethical point of view of what you're building, that it's safe and it's going to help and not hinder, your customers?
It's a really poignant topic at this moment in time, as everyone listening knows. Actually, this year, twice this year, I've worked with the Connecticut state government to be on different panels discussing, regulatory approaches to AI. So it's very relevant, even again, this is one where I have to qualify my language. Sometimes I just speak. Not that, at the Connecticut level, like I live in Connecticut, even though I'm currently in New York City on this podcast. And so what I was going to say is like, even at the Connecticut level, meaning like, it doesn't have to be at a country level. It could not even be at a state level. It could be at a very local level. Everyone is thinking about this, and everyone, I think, at least on this topic, from what I've seen in speaking to and working with some of the people that are leading the charge, they're also just good, smart people trying to do the right thing, and it's complicated. There's no easy answer. There's no balance of regulation versus innovation that is going to be right in the first instance, or probably even the 50th instance. And so, like, I don't wake up in a cold sweat about we're killing humanity or robots are going to take over. Although I'm increasingly being concerned that we're going to have to deal with that in my lifetime, whereas I thought even a couple of years ago, it wasn't going to be so. But I think that the complexity of the models, the advancements in quantum, as I mentioned before, when you put these things together, we're gonna face these problems in our lifetime, and very soon probably we're gonna approach AGI, artificial general intelligence. Hopefully nobody connects it to like any red buttons yet, but they are. And so, how do we deal with that? And how do we not stifle innovation at the same time? And how do we even put in place regulatory frameworks that are enforceable, that are not just BS like, a lot of people will probably watch this and hate me for this next comment, but like all the ISO standards, all these things that are true BS. Like all you have to do is document something, show your following document, and you're certified. What does that give you? Does it give you anything? So it's really complicated. And for me personally, I wake up in the middle of the night mostly thinking about the new things I'm working on, and not the dangerous pieces of it. But it's embedded in everything we do. We're constantly thinking about ethical and responsible use of AI. I'm friends with one of the founding board members of the Responsible AI Institute, and they work with many companies, governments, and organizations to try to drive through frameworks and standards and testing methodologies and so on that aim to ensure the ethical and responsible use. But I think it's, again, I don't know a better way to say it than it's complicated, because what you'd want in an ideal world from my point of view is I want all the innovations. I want all the advancements. I don't want to slow anything down. I want to have people behave in good, rational ways for the good of humanity. But the unfortunate truth is that that's not going to happen. And it doesn't matter if one person or 1 billion people don't think that way. All you need is one person connecting it to the wrong thing and having malicious intents. And all of the good work of all the other people on Earth won't mean anything. So I don't know that that's a needle we can thread without getting close to disaster and having to rethink everything. So unfortunately, while I've been very involved in this topic, at least at the state level and with people that I'm involved in, like professionally and personally, I haven't heard anyone come up with an answer that's satisfying.
Well, no one's looking for you, Howie, to save the planet, even though maybe sometimes you dream about it. But the reality is as you say, we are individuals, and we're not going to stem the tide of this evolution, just like the Industrial Revolution came and it freaked out, most of the world, and it did displace a lot of workers, and so did the globalization of global talent and leveraging price disparities. It wasn't, somewhere thinking that it would, destroy the lifestyle of, and it did. It changed the way we worked, but it didn't destroy the world. Now we can learn some things from the past and these two other eras, and this is like the next era. And yes, this has a little bit more sort of rapid scalability to where things could escalate out of control. I hate to freak everyone out, but as you were just saying, in every era, there are some bad actors. And if they're dealing with something that is more, powerful and disruptive to the point where, it really does act as an existential threat to humanity. Hopefully there will be people and systems that will prevent that from happening. But this is not going to go away, and it does have a lot of promise to help humanity and the world in many, many, many ways. And we can only be individual practitioners of an ethical deployment of that, in our lives, either as users or as producers. And hopefully we can, somehow band together and there's systems out there that can stop the bad actors.
I agree. I'm not going to come up with the solution to save the world, and I don't know that anybody else is anytime soon. The good news is there's a lot of people smarter than me on this that are thinking about it. The bad news is that there's the other side of it. So I think, again, in an ideal world, like if everyone used common sense, the adage of common sense isn't so common aside, like if everyone used common sense and had reasonable controls in place and didn't connect these future systems that are more sophisticated than what we can understand because they're literally more complex than our own minds, just don't connect them to things that can cause these big problems and create control that are not software in nature because those can be overcome internally. I think we're on a good path, but then you also have to have the right ethos and the right culture, as you're saying, Andy. Like if all individual practitioners, signed up for, committing to abide by the Responsible AI Institute principles and approaches, we'd have a lot smaller chance of an accident. We won't solve the malicious actor, but we will have a lot smaller chance of an accident. The thing that I love to think about and ponder, although it doesn't keep me up at night in this way, because in some ways, like, we're going to have to go through and experience it to really solve it. But, the concept and idea that in my lifetime, I might get to see sentient models that are more complex than what we can comprehend within our own mind's framework, pretty outstanding. Like wow. I just don't want them to become, their own species where they think that the solution to their problems are removing humanity, or what's that classic half joke, half serious type thing where like you ask the AI, how do you solve world hunger? And it's like, well, I kill half the people. Solved. Yeah. Not a good solution.
No. But it is one.
It is one, and we just have to make sure that we don't allow, when they will come up with those answers.
Yeah,
we can't allow them to act on them without human oversight, at least until we have sophisticated enough controls in place. Anyway, but yeah, you're right. Like in the globally distributed teams that you brought it back to is an example of that. Like you said, right? Like things have really normalized in many ways over the years, since that was a problem, was thought to be, right? It's the same thing as any adoption or maturity curve, right? Everyone feared it. And then it happened. It wasn't as bad as everyone feared, but it wasn't like simple, and it wasn't like painless. But over time, like it's sort of normalized, right? And you kind of know what you're going to get from different regions of the world. And it's kind of relative to their own economies. There has been more normalization since COVID, and remote working became much more prolific. But you know what? All talented engineers, at least, for the most part, people are going to hate me for making a blanket statement. Obviously, there's lots of nuances to this, right? There's been a huge number of layoffs this year. There's a lot of talented people that don't have jobs at the moment and are finding it hard in the current market to find like meaningful employment. I'm not ignoring all those pieces, but by and large, talented engineers have work that pays them commensurate with what they need to have a good life. And that globally distributed concept did not destroy the lives of engineers in the United States.
How have your companies handled that you're working in, as far as where their teams are, how they're interacting, how they're creating?
Yeah, so on the consultancy side, it's been a really interesting ride. Like when COVID happened, like we of course, like everybody else, went immediate to like completely remote work for a while. And we saw, like most other people saw, that we're really looking for, I think, the truth versus something else that has other motivations, which is we saw productivity be the same or even better. At the same time, I believe that there is no replacement in certain circumstances for in-person collaboration, no matter how sophisticated the teleworking like infrastructure becomes. And so we moved more to a phase thereafter of come in if you want. The office is open again, but you don't have to. And now, then we got to a place where we saw certain people were really wanting it in person and certain people were not. And that was their preference. Then we moved to where we have certain days where we want people to be in if they're physically close to an office, so that we can do those things that are to an extent irreplaceable from being done in person. And the way we handle that with clients, just like I'm sure you do with all the teams and companies you work with, is we have periodic site visits, or we have periodic customer visits to our site, right? Whichever direction it is. And there's no replacing the level of relationship building you can do, the level of brainstorming on a physical whiteboard when there's something that's complex or new, in my mind. But then now we got more to a place where, most people are in the office more again, because people are driven to that social desire of having that like interpersonal, in-person like interactions. Now, on the other companies, we've never had an office for Perceiver. We have an office for the hedge fund, but only a couple of people are in it. And so left to my own devices without like historically having offices, I want to be in person for certain things, but otherwise I enjoy not being in person, and I don't want to have a double standard. So I think everyone should be free to have the work-life balance that works for them, as long as they're meeting their commitments and delivering what they signed up to deliver, as long as they are not inflexible when the need arises.
Absolutely. Perfectly said.
So that's so personally, I don't really understand some of the bigger tech companies going back to mandates of being in the office. I don't know what political pressures are happening that causes that, but they're obviously, if they're looking at data, then they must have different data than I do.
Yeah, we've seen the hybrid approach has been usually that best model now that everyone's gotten the taste of, working from home and now being asked to come back. That balance of, come in when we need you, get your work done, have the right metrics in place, the right KPIs to judge productivity. So if you can do it correctly, you'll be the most, you'll just have so much more success.
And you remove the commuting time in many cases, right, which is substantial, and you reduce the stress level. Yeah. Like being able to take care of my kids at the same time as working, I don't have to worry.
Yeah, management has to make a change in their thoughts as well and how they manage people and process. We're living in an age right now with just all from a technology perspective. Why do you need to go? You don't need to go into work, except for, like you said, on those occasions where, bringing the team together to foster more of a relationship building. If a project's starting and it's new, bringing everyone together so they get to know everyone on a personal level and not just in this two-dimensional space.
Yeah. I agree with both of you. I'm not a champion of 100% flexibility as long as you're accountable and delivering on what you're supposed to deliver, because I think that lends itself to people abusing a perfectly flexible system. My experience is there has to be a certain degree of proximity and physical interaction periodically, because I think we all walk away from these activities thinking, wow, that was so dynamic and different than a remote existence, and I got so much out of it. And then we go back and we sort of get comfortable in our purely flexible remote way. And even like last night, I drove 2 hours, basically, again, still kicking myself to go to the CTO dinner. And even during the dinner, I thought this was, somewhat painful and awkward because we're so not used to doing it on a daily basis.
Like we forgot how to interact socially.
Man, it was just very socially awkward and stuff. And the talk, and people were like, it was just really like awkward. And then I drove 2 hours back, at midnight. But I filled up a notebook of thoughts and ideas that I wouldn't have gotten in any other forum, remote or otherwise. Yeah. And so as painful as that was, it was really, we just get into our rhythms and our grooves. I think it's a human nature thing. And sometimes you have to, the system or the entity, it has to shake that up and force changes and force you to feel uncomfortable. The purpose of life is not to feel comfortable all the time.
Yeah. If I feel comfortable for too long, I feel stagnant.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not trying hard enough. And I know Ryan, when we were talking before we started the podcast about background a little bit, I know you had mentioned, you've always been much more on like kind of the project management side of things. And it's funny. I have like this anecdote relates to project managers, right? I've interviewed, I can't count how many project managers I've interviewed over my career. And the first thing that's the biggest red flag I can ever get from any of those types of interviews is, oh, everything I've ever delivered was on time and on budget. Like, okay, so there's only two things that can be true if that's the case, and you're not lying to me. First of all, I think you're lying to me. But if you're not lying to me, you're either actually, no, sorry, I messed up my anecdote. You're either lying to me or you've never done anything hard.
Yeah.
So I agree completely. I know
Ryan, and he is lying to you, and he's never done anything hard. I'm just kidding.
10 for 10 on all projects.
I mean, it's part of and maybe we tie it to the globally distributed teams thing again for just a second in terms of selecting someone to work with. I'm not on here to try to sell my consulting firm. If it's a good fit for people, it's a good fit. If we share common values, if the price point is right, if it's the right kind of project to keep our 8 players engaged, wonderful. If not, I will happily refer you to somebody else. And this is the core of your business, Andy and Ryan, right? You work to match the right, companies and projects or the right outsourced teams that are excellent at what they do. If any vendor comes to you, if you're watching this and you're trying to shop around, and I think you guys would probably agree. If not, I'd love to hear the other point. If any vendor says the same BS to you, they're lying to you, or they've never done anything complex. It's the first thing we say when we talk about a proposal to anybody is, if it's at idea stage, we're plus or minus 50%. If we are at you have a concept and we can do a t-shirt size estimate on everything, we're plus or minus 30%. And it ties to the Agile methodology too, that you guys are very big into, that I'm also very big into, which is, I don't believe in Agile architecture. I don't believe in Agile road mapping. I don't believe in Agile conceptualization. But once you're executing, I think it's the only way to go, lowercase, not capital A. And I so often, as an advisor to startups, I always get the question, hey, I got this proposal from this outsourced team, and they're telling me it's this. Can you take a look at it? I've never dealt with this before. And I look at it and I'm like, this is telling you what you want to hear. And once you get 2 or 3 months into this thing, it's not going to play out that way. And I think everyone should just be upfront with that, because it's the same thing as the project manager that says to me in an interview, everything's been on time and on budget. The nature, and this ties back to the very beginning of our conversation today, guys, right? What inspired me initially to love software, the ability to create out of nothing pretty much anything you can imagine, if you have the skill to do so. It's the exact same thing here. It's the exact same reason why that project manager better come with war stories of how they managed through a difficult project that was way over budget and over time, but for a good reason. It can't be because they mismanaged it, right? It has to be because this thing was so much more complex in this one area and they missed it because of this root cause. And now they have to deal with that and adjust. And if you don't go into any startup, into any complex project, understanding what to expect, you are going to be so frustrated the entire time.
For sure. Hey, well, Howie, look, my producer has given me the evil eye. So
perfect.
This is the first podcast where unbeknownst to Ryan, and he's probably looking at me crazy too, it's you threw 70% of the agenda into the trash. But actually, I think this is probably our best podcast. I mean, the topics we covered and the energy and the stories, I think was really good. And I'm thankful for you coming on. We can have you back on and cover the other 70% on another podcast. That would be great. But I really appreciate you joining us.
No, this was amazing. So much fun. Loves talking to you guys, Andy and Ryan. I know now this is the third time I've spoken to you, Andy, second Ryan, and yeah, looking forward to more. So really had a good time and would love to come back whenever I'm on.
Sounds great.
Thanks a lot, Howie.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
See ya. To our listeners, we hope you enjoyed the episode of Software Without Borders. If you're interested in learning more about agile methodologies, remote team optimization, or the latest trends in software development, be sure to subscribe to our show and leave only a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting platform.